Good morning. I like Feriola's habit. Until I hear a good response, I will continue. Good morning. Thank you. It's great to be back here. Thank you to SteelOrbis and Murat for inviting me. It sounds very serious when it says, sorry, keynote, but I'm not going to talk about anything serious today. What matters the most to me is the 40th anniversary of this group that I spent for so many years. I like to start, sorry, let me clear my throat first. I like to start by thanking to you and to all who contributed for this group to reach such an important level. I don't think that there is anybody being around longer than I have. I have just mentioned the first meeting that I have attended in Monaco when I wanted to pay tribute to my late friends Ricardo and Yusuf. It was in 1987, February in Istanbul. That's, I guess, the 6th meeting. I entered the meeting room. What attracted me the most was there was this two guy. One was chairing the session. The other one was among the audience, was arguing so terribly. I thought they were fighting. It was Ricardo and Pat Simon. By the way, when I mentioned this in Monaco, after almost 20 years, I came across with Pat Simon. And that was the most attraction about this group. And I believe that was the main reason that established such robust and trustworthy relation among all the participants. And I'm really so excited with this current state of IREPAS. And of course, I have the honor to be the chairman for almost 10 years. It was last November, I think, there was another SteelOrbis conference here in Istanbul about the new horizons in steel market. And I have asked Murat, please don't invite me anymore about giving a speech. But then he called me a couple of months ago and said, why don't you come up and talk about IREPAS? Because it's the 40th anniversary. And I said, I would love to. It's for me a great honor. This group has, grown into such a huge community, which was in fact initiated by only a few people. Two companies started this, and then it evolved in such a community where it includes all the stakeholders, not only the producers or traders, but as well the consumers, the customers, the raw material suppliers, logistic providers, even the financial institutions together with the inspection companies. And we've been sharing our views, exchanging our ideas for all these years in a very honest way. I have witnessed and I remember many interesting moments in all these years. For example, I won't forget 2004 in Barcelona, when we first seen price of $400 for rebars. Before it was only between $200 to $300 for years and years. And I also remember very clearly the 2008 Istanbul meeting. It was Monday morning. I was walking into Swiss Hotel and I saw Ira Vernon was checking out. And I said, what happened? Something wrong? He says, no, Uğur. The price of rebar hit $1,000. I got to go back to the US. So that was the first time we've seen 4-digit numbers. But I also won't forget the Hamburg meeting the same year when the rebar prices were down back to $300. So there has been so much ups and downs. The life was speeding up, slowing down. And here we are celebrating the 40th year or our gathering. So I would like to thank you all again for giving such a great contribution. And of course, I would like to recall the deepest of feelings to those who are not with us anymore, but left such big impression in our hearts. Over the last 40 years, we have experienced so many changes. Of course, the young ones are not familiar with those changes, but we are very well. When we have started, we had no cell phones. We didn't even have mails. We were communicating either with the landlines. In some of the cases, even the landlines didn't exist. So we had to chat over a telex machine, just like you guys are doing on a WhatsApp today. My very first market was Lebanon, so I had to sit on a telex machine and had to learn how to write and chat and do the negotiations to make a deal. The traveling wasn't that easy. I mean, flying to East for 10 hours, before we had to fly 4 hours west, wait there for another 4 hours before taking the 10-hour flight to go on China or Singapore. And because of those reasons, the words really did matter, because we didn't have instruments to put things on writing so easy. So the words really were the contracts for us. But the competition was still very tough, very intense. But still, I believe the understanding was much in a different level. I remember when we had a dispute with the European steel producers on the rebar shipments to Europe. So we decided to set a meeting with Eurofer. I don't know if there's anybody who were involved in those meetings. Once in Athens, between Eurofer and Turkish side, the meetings were so heated up, we had to give a break for every hour to cool things down. And finally, we realized we were not coming to an end. So both sides have decided to appoint a representative so things would, at least negotiated calmly. So Eurofer appointed Ricardo Hugas, and the Turkish side appointed me for a year in different places in Europe. We made all these meetings to find a solution between two sides. And finally, we brought these two groups in Linz, Austria. So the Ricardo said, so Uğur, what's your proposal? Do we have an agreement? And I said, you know what? I'm sorry, we're not going to have an agreement. And the response was, okay, let's go for a dinner. So I'm telling this, for every issue, our first goal was to reach a mutual agreement before we go to the court. Of course, we went to the court on several occasions, but first we wanted to see if we can achieve on a reasonable solution mutually. Even if we go to the court, we knew that we've been treated fairly, which today, unfortunately, doesn't exist anymore. That's the main difference, I believe, that I am seeing or observing over this last 40 years. The things start changing, and this is what we realize in last WTO report. The global trade is declining. There are certain other factors involved, like strong dollar, tightening monetary policies, high inflation, the conflicts around the world. But more important, I believe, what I realize, the game being changed. Now the rules are rewritten again, especially by the developed nations. Over the last 5 years, started with the US and continued with Europe, they're closing their doors. So after benefiting of globalization for decades, they've decided to change the game after they see a decline in their competitive strength. And I'm afraid if it continues going like this will cause a more of social unrest and more of conflict, because it is putting a lot of stress on the growth of developing nations. All these things that they prohibited or banned with certain agreements like WTO, like ECSC, now we see those countries or areas or nations don't care those rules anymore. I mean, EU starts subsidizing its steel industry lately, giving billions of dollars to the steel companies, although back in 1952, they clearly written the rules how to grant government aid. And all those years, they've been accusing us in Turkey that we've been subsidized. And we proved so many times that wasn't the case. But today, just last week, UK government announced that they were going to grant 500 billion pounds to Tata, which is just an example as we have seen in other areas in Austria, in Germany, in France, and everything. And they find a very nice terminology, decarbonization, which means nothing but changing the BOFs with electric arc furnaces. At the same time, US, by protecting its domestic industry, to my calculation, transferred, I think, close to $100 billion so that the industry could renew itself. On top of the support given by cheap energy, free lends, etc. And the other thing that I realized in the past, I saw those companies used to show interest outside their territories, but today none of the US or the European mills has no intention of acquiring any facility or expanding their activities outside of their territory. They're just focusing to their domestic market. So that's also another indication for me what they're planning for future to come. And if I look at the rest of the world, there are also some activities like Indians are targeting 300 million tons by 2030, although their previous target was 200 by 2020, which they couldn't achieve, but they are pushing hard to achieve that 300 million by 2030. I see Chinese not doing anything domestic, but they have huge activities outside of China, especially in Southeast Asia. They're planning to add another 100 million tons within a very short period of time. Another attractive area is MENA because of their advantage, especially on the logistics and the raw material energy. And here in Turkey, what we do, we deal with the trade remedies. We struggle with the conflicts around us, especially with the war, although they don't even call it anymore a war. It doesn't even appear in the media lately, but definitely we still feel all the consequences of what's happening in Ukraine. Russia and Ukraine were very important for the Turkish steel industry. They were competitors, but they were also a big supporters as far as the raw materials are concerned. Turkey was importing 7 million tons of material together with 7 million tons of raw material, which today doesn't come anymore. And that's gave a big hit on the competitive strength of the Turkish steel industry. And now those sanctions are hurting the Turkish steel industry very negatively. Just about a month ago, we were visited by an official from the US Embassy. She introduced herself as the Treasury attaché, which I haven't heard before. And she said that it was the first time they appointed in Turkey. There are about 30 of them. She talked about if we are aware of the risks of having our relations with Russian entities or having business with them. But she never seemed that she were interested about the cost that we are paying or whether we were strong enough to afford avoiding our relations with them. And I responded, I said, it's kind of confusing to me because it wasn't us who bombed Pearl Harbor in 45, or we didn't even participated in the Second World War. And we've been allies to NATO since 1950, worked together in Korea or Somalia or Afghanistan. But in terms of national security, Turkey is still being considered as a threat to US economy. So that was, to me, was quite confusing and interesting. And the same now appears in Europe. All the European clients are requiring a declaration from Turkish steel exporters to confirm that they have no Russian input into the steel they ship, while they still import slabs from Russia. So what I'm trying to say, the game being changed and is going in a different direction, which is not healthy at all, because the trade is the most important element to strengthen the relations between countries, between nations. So if you feel that you're strong enough to change it at any time you like, that might cause more of conflicts in the days to come. Turkish steel industry, to my opinion, has come to a stagnation. I think the growth period is over. And from now on, we will try to keep what we have in our hands. But it's not going to be easy in the days to come. So we have to struggle very, very hard. Although we're still discussing how we can reduce our emission without realizing that we have one of the lowest in the world. Europeans are about to, start the carbon adjustment system, and we still haven't done anything much to bring our regulation into force so that we can at least comply with theirs. We're still struggling to prove that we're not dumping or we're not receiving any subsidies. But I believe this is going to be the main challenges for our industry in years to come. What we do as Çolakoğlu, we, of course, as a company, trying to grow. We have just increased our production to 4.5 million tons. We're going more into the value-added grades, trying to serve especially OEMs in EU by strengthening our quality capabilities. And also we have done quite an improvement on our IT side to be more lean, more sustainable. I might just draw a bit of a pessimist scenario, but we have to keep our hopes, because for this last 40 years we have seen so many, as I said, ups and downs, but I still see so many familiar faces, old friends. That's so valuable to me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dalbeler.
About anything to have a question, but anyway.
I don't know, maybe they have some questions. I may have one. Are there any questions from the floor for Mr. Dalbeler? Okay, can I have one question? One of our colleagues raised this question, so I wanted to direct this question to you. In the US, you talked about this carbon emissions tariffs, and the US has a carbon emissions tariffs policy. Obviously, they decided to implement the policy according to the average emissions of a country for the third countries. And this obviously doesn't help any individual producer to invest individually, because the average for the country will be taken into consideration. Do you think any change will happen in this US policy, or?
Most probably, but those talks are still continuing. I mean, there are different views, different opinions. Of course, the BOFs are having a different opinion. EIFs have different opinions. Some supports, on individual basis. Some supports countries' averages, and some even supports on the product basis. There's still a big confusion, what I see. And honestly, I don't believe this is a very sincere issue. I mean, it's part of the game that they want to change. This is how I look at it.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? We have one question over there. Microphone.
Dalbeler, I have a question. You said that Turkey has lost its competition advantage and now in the stage of stagnation and growth is over. Do you think that Turkish mills, are they ready to change their feedstock supply from scrap?
I don't think that's possible because 75% of the Turkish steel industry is based on EAF, so that's the only option they have. Changing it to DRI at this moment in the short run is not possible because of energy cost and availability of the raw material itself. So we will continue competing in the scrap market. We will, of course, see how the Europeans are going to act because they have just declared scrap to be critical. And we don't know how this EU waste management system will evolve. But to answer your questions, no, we don't have that in the short run, the possibility to change our raw material strategy.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Dalbeler, thank you very much for
Thank
joining
you.
us this morning, and